This is Big Tasty Sports. It's a black hat day around here. The Vikings got stomped. You're not here for Minnesota Vikings updates, though. We're back with another week of futures bets. This is the NFL after week 11 futures. And before we get into the picks today, just a couple things I want to talk about big picture. First of all, there are timestamps in the description. So if you want to skip all this stuff, if you want to skip from pick to pick and not have to listen to the breakdowns and that kind of stuff, that's why the timestamps are there. I know sometimes I just want to listen to bets or read the bets or whatever if I'm looking at an article. So I totally get it. And if that's you, feel free to put the timestamps to use and do that. In terms of the futures market big picture, just a couple things that I'm noticing as I've been looking at this from week to week. Number one, it does feel like betting futures is going to get tougher and tougher as we go week to week. There are a couple reasons for that. First of all, there are less futures being offered. So that is not surprising as we move toward the end of the season. Some of the things that were offered earlier on, the books are just deciding not to put out lines for it. For instance, who's going to have most wins in a conference? You know, I think you could still make a good line on that, probably in both conferences, but for whatever reason, they're just not putting lines like that out anymore. So the number of futures bets you can, or the variety that you have to pick from, is decreasing. Secondly, it does feel like the lines are getting sharper on these futures bets, which again, totally makes sense because even though we have more information, the books have more information as well. So that gets more dialed in. The other thing that I'm noticing is that there are some things you used to be able to parlay that now you are not able to. That's actually been true maybe for a couple weeks now, especially teams to make or miss the playoffs. That probably gets too correlated at this point in the season. And so it kind of makes sense to me that you're not allowed to do that. I wish it was still there, but it's not. So all that to say, if you want to get in on some futures bets, I think you're better off doing it sooner rather than later to get the most value on these picks. I will continue to look and put out bets that I think make sense as long as they keep offering the futures. But that is just something to notice if you have any interest in having some futures. There was one other thing that the other thing I was just going to say, I try not to beat this drum too much, but hey, if you're watching this video and you've been getting some good information from it, even if you haven't, but you don't hate me, whatever, just like the video if you would, if you're watching it. Even if it's not a huge number of likes, it's just always an encouragement as the views on the videos are going up, but it's nice to know if people are benefiting from it. So if you could do that, it would be tremendously appreciated. Subscribe to the channel. Definitely would love to have you leave a comment too. Let me know what you're thinking. Even if you think some of my picks are trash, that's fine. Let me know why and let me know what you like. That would be more fun. If you're listening on the podcast, please rate and review the podcast. All of that would be greatly appreciated. With that said, let's jump into some futures, huh? All right. As always, we're going to review last week's bets that I made first. One up, one down. Baltimore, I took over 11.5 wins last week at plus 115. They kind of squeaked by the Panthers. Not a great look, but that's sort of what this Baltimore team does. Minus 120 now on over 11.5 wins. I'm not going to talk about that this week, but I think it's still a pretty decent line if you like it and don't have anything on Baltimore yet. The other one that went down was a division winner parlay with Baltimore, Tennessee, and Philadelphia from 152 down to 138, minus 138, minus 152 to minus 138. That has a lot to do, I think, with Philadelphia losing a game, squeaking by in another, Dallas looking incredibly dominant over Minnesota, and so those odds move a little bit. It's not a huge move because, again, we're talking about 14 points of movement here. So if you still like those three teams, you could consider getting in on that now at a little bit better price than I got last week. But I'm still fine with that bet. I mean, it's not impossible for Dallas to win this division. That's going to actually come up here in the bets that I am going to talk about. All right, so we're going to go through 6 bets that I have for you this week. 6 or 7. let's see, actually 7 bets. There was a sneak preview if you're on the video of the first one. But one of those 7 I'm not actually betting this week, but only because I have a lot on it from another week. So I will talk about that, be very upfront about where I got it, what it's at now. These 7 bets, I just worked with the implied probability and then my probability of these bets happening and went from what I think is the least likely to the most likely, or least confidence to most confidence. I got into implied probability a lot, I think, last week. I'm not going to talk about it as much this week in terms of the specifics. If you're interested in where I have those things based on the lines, you can always DM me at NBA Attack on Twitter, or email me at bigtastysports@gmail.com. I'd be happy to answer any questions about what I have in terms of the difference in implied probability and my probability of these different things happening and what I think the lines should be. All right, so number 7 this week, and I'm going to tell you up front, this is going to be the longest breakdown of any of the bets that I'm going to share here. Once I get through this one, I will definitely move more quickly, but this one is a shock to me. Here's the reason that I even got into looking at this pick. And if you're on the podcast, the pick number 7 is Washington to make the playoffs, plus 158. I bet enough to win 1 unit. I didn't bet a unit. So for me, units are $50. I think I bet like $31 or $32 here. This is on FanDuel. So the reason I researched this in the first place is I was interested in Washington under their win total, and I was interested in Washington not to make the playoffs, which was at minus 165. I have not been a believer in Washington. I will say that up front. For a while, I toyed with betting them to have the least wins in the NFL. I didn't pull the trigger on that. Thank goodness. That would have been a pretty stupid bet. But I just haven't really believed in anything that this team does. I didn't think that their offensive weapons were all that good. Certainly didn't believe in their defense and especially their secondary. Now, all that hasn't completely turned around for me. However, I will say that the defensive line is playing better and getting a little bit of pressure. And then St. Juste is really become a pretty lockdown number 1 corner. So that is making their defense decent. Now, they just beat the Houston Texans. That's not anything to write home about. Everybody's beating the Texans. But what I liked is that they did it dominantly. Now, the Texans did drop an easy interception at the beginning of this game that could have made things a little bit different, but they dropped it. And from there on, Washington just dominated. They didn't just win. And that's something you want to see when they're playing Houston if you're going to be on the side of anything positive for them. All right, now let me walk through, because really a lot of this comes down to schedule. And so let me walk through that. In terms of the bottom of the playoff picture in the NFC, I still think that the Giants are most likely to make the playoffs in the number 7 spot. The 3 teams that are in the running for this are Washington, the Giants, and Atlanta. Let's rule Atlanta out first. They have a very, very long shot to win that division if Tampa Bay doesn't pull it together at all. But right now, Atlanta is 5-6, Washington is 6-5, and the Giants are 7-3. So the Giants certainly have the upper hand record-wise. Atlanta plays at Washington. Now, here's a big part of what's playing into this for me, is if Washington is going to get over 8.5 wins, which right now is minus 120. So the books are telling you there's a better chance of them getting to 9 than not getting to 9, though it's close. So they're seeing Washington right around 8 or 9 wins, which I actually have them projected for 7, but there's enough variance here that this is why this pick is a little bit surprising to me and why I prefer it over 8.5 wins. So Atlanta is at Washington. If Washington's going to get to 9 wins, maybe even 8, they need to win that game. Then, so that's a loss potentially. Atlanta plays Pittsburgh, at New Orleans, at Baltimore, Arizona, Tampa Bay. I can actually see them losing every single one of those games. Let's say they win 2 of them. That leaves them at 7-10. So if things break that way, then like if Atlanta wins enough games to beat out Washington for this playoff spot, I think it's because they beat Washington, in which case I lose that bet either way. So next week's game is a big one, but I'm going to assume that Washington is able to beat Atlanta. So now we come down to Washington and the Giants. Well, here's what got me onto this pick is Washington's schedule. They play Atlanta, then they're at the Giants, and then there's a bye, and then they're home to the Giants. And the bye is, the bye is theirs. So they do get that extra week of prep in there. Then they're at San Francisco, obviously tough. Cleveland at home, and then at Dallas, obviously tough. Again, if they are gonna win this bet, or if they're gonna get over 8.5 wins, they have to beat the Giants. And they probably have to beat the Giants twice. Now, I'm not saying that's likely. I think it's much more likely that those teams split. But again, if they're going to get over 8.5 wins, I think that has to happen. Now, listen to the Giants' schedule. They're at Dallas this week. Then they play Washington. Then in that bye week for Washington, they play Philadelphia. Then at Washington, at Minnesota, which will not be a cakewalk. It's certainly a game they could win. Indianapolis at home, and then at Philadelphia. The Giants' schedule overall, I think, is tougher. And really, a lot of what this comes down to is going to be the head-to-head matchups between Washington and the Giants. Well, if Washington's going to get to 9 wins, as Vegas slightly favors them to do, then they're going to beat the Giants twice. If they beat the Giants twice, I think they either both end up with 9 wins. Yeah, most likely they both end up at 9 wins, I would say, if they get there. So then it comes down to the tiebreaker. Well, the number one tiebreak is head-to-head. And like I just said, if they're going to end up tied, it's going to be because they beat the Giants twice. So they win that tiebreaker. Let's say they did split, and by some miracle, because sometimes things just go weird in the NFL, they still end up tied in terms of their win totals. Well, the next tiebreaker is their win percentage in the conference. Right now, the Giants are 2-3, and Washington is 3-4. If they both get to tied records, I would project the Giants to be 3-8 in the conference and Washington to be 5-7. So they would win that secondary tiebreaker as well. Okay, so big picture. What I'm not saying here is, as I've said, it's plus 158. If this was plus 100, I wouldn't make this bet. I still think it is more likely that the Giants make the playoffs than I do that Washington does. However, I think it's more likely that both of them do than that Atlanta does at this point. So it really comes down to those two. And like I said, what you need is Washington to beat the Giants twice, and then they win the tiebreaker if they get there. So at plus 158, I don't think that there's actually a massive edge on this one, but I think there's some edges, which is why I only bet to win one unit. I didn't even bet a full unit, which is normally my lowest bet threshold. So take that for what it's worth. It's a bit of a flyer, but I just wanted to talk about this one because it's fun when you get into capping something and you think you're going to go one way and you end up going the other way. And I enjoy this one because there's a lot more complexity to it, which is what makes futures fun. It's just not so straightforward. So if you want to ride with me, feel free. But that is pick number 7. All right, as I said, from here, we will pick up the pace a little bit because all of the rest of these are going to be win totals. So they're a bit more straightforward. Coming in at number 6 is the Denver Broncos under 5.5 wins, plus 125 for 1 unit at FanDuel. I'm actually already on the Broncos under 6.5 wins at plus 125. But one of the games that was pushing me to be questionable about the 5.5 was last week's game against the Raiders, which they found a way to lose. And so now I am projecting Denver, let me find it here, to be 4-13. If you've listened to these videos, this podcast long, you know that part of what I also do is project a floor and a ceiling in terms of wins. And I have Denver's ceiling at 5 wins right now. Let's just talk through the schedule here quickly. So they're currently at 3 wins. They could win 2 more, and I still win this bet. The 2 games that I think they could win are at Carolina and at the Rams. However, with the way that the Broncos have been playing this year, Carolina has a decent defense, and so do the Rams. So I think both of those teams are able to hold Denver to 13 or less points. And so then you just need those offenses to get a couple big plays, and they potentially could beat the Broncos. I think those are probably close to 50-50 games. I might favor the Broncos 55-45 in those games. Middle tier games for me are Arizona and the Chargers, both in Denver. I think Arizona and the Chargers are both better than Denver, but I could see Denver pulling out one of those games, probably especially Arizona. And then the difficult games, they're at Baltimore, Kansas City, home and away. I don't see them winning any of those three. So basically, I need them to lose one of at Carolina, at the Rams, or no, I'm sorry, two. I need them to go 2-2 at Carolina, at the Rams, Arizona, and the Chargers at home. I think there is a high probability that they only go 2-2 or worse in those games. So for me, getting plus 125 when I see Denver's win total at best at 5, this is a really strong bet for me. And if I didn't already have a unit or two, sorry, I don't remember how much I put on it, at under 6.5, I would probably be going 2 units on this bet. Next up at number 5 is the New York Jets over 8.5 wins, minus 130. I bet this to win 1 unit at FanDuel. This is one where patience paid off. Not that it's a massive difference, but if you remember, if you watched this last week, I was considering betting the Jets under 9 wins at minus 120. Well, now we get rid of the push at 9, and we do have to pay 10 cents. It's minus 130 instead of minus 120, but I certainly prefer over 8.5 at minus 130 to over 9 at minus 120. So that patience paid off as they once again lost a game to the Patriots that was just a shit show on offense. Both teams played well defensively. At this point, I feel like we know what we're getting with the Jets. A very good defense, top tier NFL defense, a lackluster offense that is going to absolutely struggle when they play a defense that has any kind of backbone. However, when they play mediocre to worse defenses, I think they're still going to be able to score points. They can run the ball with Michael Carter. They have pretty decent weapons on offense. So yes, Zach Wilson sucks, but if the coverage isn't as good and there's not as much pressure on him, I think he's going to be able to do enough to generate some offense for the Jets, and their defense is going to hold people down. The Jets are currently at 6 wins, which means they need 3 more to cash this bet. Lower tier teams, they have Chicago, Detroit, and Jacksonville all at home. I think Chicago is a phenomenal matchup for them because Chicago has almost no defense to speak of. Their offense has been better, but that's where the Jets are going to shine in shutting that down. Detroit, similar, not a good defense. Jacksonville, maybe a little better, but not great. Then they go at Minnesota, at Seattle. They certainly have a chance to win both of those games. Both of those teams have pretty good offenses. The defenses are so-so. I actually think Minnesota's defense is okay. They got put in a bad spot against Dallas this last week. And Seattle's defense has been coming along a little bit. So that's why I have those as middle tier games. And then at Buffalo and at Miami, I would expect them to lose. So here again, I think they could get their 3 wins with these 3 games at home: Chicago, Detroit, Jacksonville. Let's say they drop one of those. Well, then I need them to beat Minnesota or Seattle on the road, which I think is certainly doable. So I think the Jets actually are likely to have 4 more wins in them. I like them to get to 10-7, but all we need them to do is get to 9 wins. And I do like to talk about the lines as well. There is some line discrepancy on this one. So this bet on DraftKings is minus 150, and FanDuel it's minus 130. At minus 150, I might still play it, but I definitely like it a lot less. So if you can get this line and you like this bet, I would go find it. Number 4, those vaunted Dallas Cowboys. Over 11.5 wins. This is at minus 165 now, so it's getting steep on the juice. You can get over 12.5 for plus 120. This is all on FanDuel. This is the one where I told you there was one that I would talk about that I was not going to bet, and this is the one that I'm not going to bet. The reason is I got Dallas over 11.5 wins at minus 121 and bet enough to win 4 units. Last week or 2, it must have been 2 weeks ago. So at this price, I'm not really interested in getting in for more. However, I will tell you, if I had bet nothing on this so far, I would be betting smaller, probably to win 1 or at max 2 units on the minus 165. Let me talk about why I like that more than the over 12.5 at plus 120, because the plus money is certainly always appealing. Right now, Dallas is actually only at 7 wins. And so to get over 12.5, they would need 6 more. To get over 11.5, they need 5 more. The games that I would expect Dallas to win almost certainly are Indianapolis, Houston at home, and then at Jacksonville. Then they have the Giants at home, at Washington. I put those as middle tier games, partly because they're divisional. The Giants and Washington will both be fighting to try to get into the playoffs, but I still expect Dallas to win those games, so that's 5. Then they have Philadelphia at home, and they're at Tennessee. Both of those, I think, will be more difficult games. I think Philadelphia and Tennessee match up better against Dallas than any of those other teams. Dallas absolutely could run the table. Don't get me wrong. This is a really good team on both sides of the ball. And so I'm not saying that I favor Dallas or Philly and Tennessee to beat them. I'm just saying those games I think will be much more competitive. And so I feel confident about Dallas getting 5 wins. They could even win one of those Philly or Tennessee games. They could drop one somewhere else. They still get 5. To get to 12.5, they need to win all 5 of the games that I said I think they should, plus beating either Philadelphia or Tennessee in Nashville. So it certainly could happen, but I don't like it as well. I won't get into what the exact probabilities were, but for me on the over 11.5, even at minus 165, I had over a 9-point difference in implied probability and my probability, where with the over 12.5 at plus 120, I had less than a 4% difference. So that to me is why I would still rather lay the juice here than I would go and get that plus money. But that's where I'm at on this play. You can do what you would like with that, obviously. All right. We move on to pick number 3. Bet all of these actually are things that I've bet other than Dallas, which I told you about why I didn't. So next up is Seattle over 9.5 wins at plus 100. I actually already had 1 unit on this. I forget if I got it at plus 100. It was somewhere around there. It might have been minus 110 or plus 110, but it was in this neighborhood. I know I should have written it down. That's my bad. But that's the reason I'm not going 2 units here. I would be going 2 units if I didn't have some already on it. So I do like this pick and would bet it at 2 units if I was just coming to it today. And this is a Barstool, by the way. So this is one, again, where there is line discrepancy. FanDuel and DraftKings both have this at minus 115. That's a significant difference. So definitely go get that plus 100 if you like this bet. Seattle's currently at 6 wins, which means they need 4 more to cash this bet. In the bottom tier games for them, I have the Raiders. At home, they have the Raiders, Carolina, and the Rams. Whew. All good spots for them to get wins. Now, the Rams defense is tough, and so that could give Seattle some problems because they've struggled against really good defenses. But man, I just don't know how the Rams are going to score. And so I still think that's a game they should win. And then they also go to the Rams. So again, I'm saying I think that they win both those games. Maybe they split just because of the matchup. Then they have San Francisco and the Jets both at home. Again, these are 2 tough defenses, which is why I think those games are tough for Seattle, but they have a chance. And then they go to Kansas City. Honestly, matchup-wise, I think it's hard to go to Arrowhead, but matchup-wise, Kansas City probably isn't the worst for them because Kansas City is going to score a lot, but their defense isn't as strong as some of these other teams. So I might even drop that at Kansas City into the same tier as San Francisco and the Jets just because of the matchup. So like I said, they need 4 more wins. Well, out of the Raiders, 2 against the Rams and Carolina, let's say they win 3. So now I need 1 more with San Francisco and the Jets at home and then at Kansas City. I just think that it is more than 50%. I put this at 59% that they get to 10 wins. Certainly it's possible that they lose all 3 of those tougher games and then drop one to the Rams. Now you don't win this bet, but that's why it's a bet. And that's why at this line, I like it. So plus 100, Seattle over 9.5 wins. 2 left to get through the picks after week 11. Pick number 2 is Houston under 2.5 wins. This is minus 120, and I played it to win 2 units at FanDuel. Houston's atrocious, man. I mean, Washington is better than I thought, but they couldn't generate anything against Washington. It was just ugly. And they're playing at home. I just really thought that they would come out and look better in that game. They just prove week after week that they can't, and they won't. So right now, Houston is at 1 win. They can only win one more for me to win this bet. They get 2, I lose. Games that I think are winnable for them. They have Cleveland and Jacksonville at home, and they go to the Colts. The Colts are playing better. Jacksonville is a better team than they are. And Cleveland is a better team than they are. I mean, this isn't saying much. Pretty much everyone's a better team than they are. But all of those are absolutely games that they can lose. That's just the easier ones. Other than that, they go to Miami, to Dallas, to Tennessee, and then they have Kansas City at home. Yeah, I mean, okay, the chances of them covering a spread in one of those games, sure, it's possible, but the chances of them winning one of those games outright, I just think isn't high. I don't really need to spend a ton of time here. I think this is a team that absolutely could lose outright. I can have one of those not go the way I think it's going to go, and they get one more win, and I still win this bet. I mean, pretty soon I'm going to be tempted to bet them under 1.5. I don't know if I'll ever pull the trigger on that, but under 2.5, minus 120, I think that's pretty much a gift of a line. So I'll take that to win 2 units. And then my number 1 pick for the week, with apologies to Shady, is the Las Vegas Raiders under 5.5 wins, plus 120 on FanDuel. And I bet this for 2 units. So you win 2.4 or whatever. Yeah, not whatever. 2.4. All right, here's where I'm at with the Raiders. There's no doubt that this bet might even though it's my number 1 bet of the week, because based on the probabilities, this is what I came up with the biggest margin. The Raiders absolutely have the ability to have more variance. So they are more likely than the Texans to go out and win a game here and there, because that offense can still get it done. We saw that against Denver this last week. Denver is a good defense, and the Raiders did enough offensively, though it was sketchy, to get the win in that game. But the Raiders are just proving week after week that they're not very good. They don't make great decisions. Their defense is soft. Their offense is explosive, but often just can't put it together for whatever reason. So the Raiders are at 3 wins right now, which means I need them to win 2 or less the rest of the way. They do have 2 games where I think they've got a decent shot. That's at the Rams. Again, the Rams just not good right now, so I think the Raiders could outpace them offensively, even against a good defense. And then at Pittsburgh. Now, that's going to be a tough game. I like Pittsburgh more than I have in the past, but I think that's winnable for the Raiders. Other than that, they go to Seattle. The Raiders are the kind of team that Seattle beats up on, especially in Seattle, so I don't think that's a good matchup. They go to the Chargers. The Raiders are the kind of team the Chargers beat up on. Chargers are at home. Sorry, but still. New England comes to town. That maybe is sort of winnable, but I think they're going to struggle against that defense and just way better coaching. San Francisco comes to the Raiders. They have a lot of games at home here, but San Francisco, not a good matchup. And then Kansas City, also not a great matchup, though the Raiders played with them a little bit in Kansas City this year. But I just don't think it's a game they win. I mean, so let's say they cover some of these spreads, it doesn't mean they win the game. So if they can go 1-1 even against the Rams and Pittsburgh, man, I feel pretty good about them losing 4 out of 5. Seattle, Chargers, Patriots, 49ers, Chiefs. So I think maybe they only get to 2 more wins. That's actually, I believe, where I have them projected. Let's see. I have them projected at 4-13. The floor at 3 and the ceiling at 5. So that's where even my ceiling projection is under this win total, and I'm getting plus money. That's just something that I can't pass up. So I like that for 2 units. All right, that concludes the actual bets for today. Again, if you have any questions, thoughts, comment, DM me, whatever it is, would love to talk through these. The last thing I'm going to do is walk through the AFC and NFC playoff pictures as I see them, divisions as I see them, just give you an update on where things stand. There's a lot less movement this week than there has been in previous weeks, which is probably as it should be as we near the end of the season. So first, the AFC. AFC, not so much. You can see that there isn't a lot of movement. I have those +1, -1, whatever, the green and the red next to each team if they've moved. If you are on the podcast, don't worry, I will highlight any real movement here. In the West, I moved Denver down to 4-13 from 5-12. Just that doesn't affect much other than the futures bet that I talked about today. I still have Buffalo clear of Miami by 2 games, Kansas City clear of the Chargers by 5 games, Baltimore clear of Cincinnati by 3, and Tennessee clear of Indianapolis by 4.5. 3.5. How do those halves work? 4.5, I think. Someone can help me with that who's better at math. Maybe not better at math, better at ties. I did move Indianapolis up 1 game, but that doesn't really matter. Cleveland down 1, Pittsburgh up 1. Again, doesn't matter. I have the playoff picture the same as I did last week. Kansas City, Buffalo, Baltimore, Tennessee, Miami, the Jets, Cincinnati. I did move the Chargers and the Patriots into the mix here. Actually, I think I had them in the mix last week too, but I would leave them there. New England, certainly, they just have no offense is the problem, but they have good coaching and they have good defense, so they're going to be in games. And then I actually liked what I saw from the Chargers against Kansas City. If they can be healthy, that offense is potent, and I think they certainly are still in the mix to make the playoffs. The question is if the offense can stay healthy, because if Allen and Williams continue to be hurt and out, then I think they fall off and will not make the playoffs. And the NFC. Here I have slightly more movement, though not a ton that matters. In the NFC East, I moved Philadelphia down to 15-2, Dallas up to 13-4, the Giants down to 10-7, and Washington up to 7-10. But hey, that's 2 spots up for Washington. So I'm getting higher on them. And as I talked about in that first bet, I still think they have a chance to make the playoffs. In the West, everything stayed pretty much the same other than bumping the Rams down 1 more to 4-13. NFC North, I still have Minnesota 5 games clear of Green Bay at 12-5. I did move them down 1 win to 12. Detroit up 1 to 6. And then in the South, I bumped Tampa Bay up 1 to 9 wins. That goes really to the strength of the schedule that they have left to play. And then Atlanta down 1 to 7. Even though they won, Atlanta just is not a very good team. So they're going to have to get pretty lucky, though they could still get lucky. So I have Philadelphia clear of Dallas by 2. San Francisco clear of Seattle only by 1. Minnesota clear of Green Bay by 5. And Tampa clear of Atlanta by 2. The playoff picture, I just moved San Francisco up to number 2 and Minnesota down to 3. That was it. And then I did put in the mix Washington and Atlanta. I think they both are a little bit of long shots. You know, Washington, it's the case I laid out for you of how they could make it. Really, if you want to know anything about that and you didn't listen to it, go listen to my breakdown of that first pick for Washington to make the playoffs, and you'll hear all of my thoughts on that situation. All right, that's the futures after week 11. We'll see what we continue to get week to week here, but I think there are still some really good spots here. We'll find out if I'm right. If you are coming along, best of luck to you. If you want to fade, best of luck to you as well. No ill will toward anybody around here. Hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you soon.